Putin has urgently contacted Trump, warning about possible strikes on the Crimean bridge and airfields. Today we discuss whether Putin is ready to retaliate at Orakov with Sergey Aslanyan, host of Khodorkovsky Live. Sergey, welcome and thanks for joining us. Hello, glad to be here. Friends, please like and comment on today's topics. It helps the video reach more people. Share your views on Oreshnik, Trump, and Putin's statements, and tell us where you're watching from. We appreciate our thoughtful audience worldwide. Sergey, let's start with the fact that Trump just minutes ago reported a phone conversation with dictator Putin. According to the US president, the conversation lasted 1 hour and 15 minutes. Trump claims that Putin during the conversation was extremely forceful about the need to respond to the recent Ukrainian attack on Russian airfields. At the same time as these statements, several countries' embassies in Ukraine began warning their citizens of possible massive strikes. We also remember the threats of Russian propaganda, including the so-called Oreshnik strike. Sergey, a question for you. What do you think Trump and Putin might have talked about? How realistic is a strike on Kyiv or other Ukrainian targets, including a Oreshnik strike? And in general, how do you assess this situation? Please give us your analysis and introduction. The first one to get scared was Keith Kellogg, who said that Ukraine was pissing off this bear for nothing, because it is one thing when Ukraine is beaten, and another when it responds. It's not appropriate to do that. It should have been tolerated, because it's normal for them when Russians kill Ukrainians. Now, after several incidents, including those with railroad bridges, which are now almost out of the question, the only thing left is the Crimean bridge and that famous drone attack. Why isn't everything going according to Putin's instructions? He sent clear orders from the Kremlin on how Ukraine should respond to Russian provocations, yet Ukraine keeps surprising them. Now Trump seems scared and warns that Ukraine has gone too far. But we remember their last talks. Putin and Trump gave very different versions of the conversation. And what they ended up talking about, nobody knows, especially since one of them doesn't speak English and the other one doesn't speak Russian. This is not Zelensky, who is fluent in several languages. So when Trump suddenly appears and says something, it's practically the same as any statement from the Russian side. Medvedev said something, Peskov said something, Kononenkov says something all the time. A lot of people reach the microphone, but nothing concrete follows from Trump's words. And Russia, according to the American interpretation, Russia is now supposedly very formidable and resentful. Well, 3 years. So what? Concentration camps for Ukrainians, genocide, Bucha. It's all right. It's the way it should be done with Ukrainians. That's now. Well, it is necessary. And this is only the version of the American side. On the Russian side, Medvedev confirmed that this is genocide. Then the Americans interpret it as, how terrible. And Russia keeps silent and hints to everyone, pretending that, say, we understand that probably now there will be a nuclear strike. Because Russia, look, this is the situation. That's what it takes. So what about there? But now it's not the same at all. For 3.5 years now, Russia has lacked arguments in this war to turn the situation around in any way. The war has not gone well. Kyiv has not been taken in 3 days, 3 weeks, or 3 years. There have long been moments when Russia could have decisively changed the course of the war by taking control of the situation and presenting a strong argument. For example, by wiping Kyiv off the face of the earth or using its entire nuclear potential against Ukraine. But it did not do so. When the Soviet Union was losing the war in Afghanistan, it was a nuclear superpower being defeated by the Afghans. The Soviet Union, losing men, betraying allies, left there with its tail between its legs. It was a nuclear superpower, which fought for its interests for 10 years, but then it became clear that there was nothing to fight with and not enough spirit. Moreover, at the very beginning of the Afghan war, The Soviet Union was in a tough conflict with the world, having sacrificed the 1980 Olympics, which was boycotted because of the Soviet troops' entry into Afghanistan, which the whole world perceived unequivocally negatively.
Советский Союз, тогда находясь, особенно в самом начале афганской войны, в антагонизме со всем миром, пожертвовав Олимпиадой, на которую никто не приехал, потому что Олимпиада 80, она была бойкотирована, и мир не поехал, именно потому что ввод советских войск, нападение на Афганистан всем миром было воспринято однозначно.
So what? So after you have already positioned yourself like this, when you don't care about anything, you attacked a neighboring country, gave up your own Olympics, which turned into the Cup of 100 countries. You could have, while continuing to ignore everything, used nuclear weapons in Afghanistan, but you didn't. Why not? Because you don't have nukes, because you don't have the guts, or because you have the understanding of how it would all end. And now only Trump is explaining to us that now it's definitely Ukraine. Now any nutcracker will be justified, any nuclear bombing. And if Kyiv is wiped off the face of the earth, embassies would have already started, not just to warn, but to evacuate their people. Now it is clear that Russia's hands are untied, because it supposedly has the right. This is the point of view of the Americans, who throughout all these negotiations between the 7th president and Putin are trying to get Ukraine to agree to Russia's ultimatum, but in no way to force Russia to make peace. No one is going to force Russia to make peace, and there are no claims against Russia, but as we can see, there are more claims against Ukraine.
Никто не собирается Россию принуждать к миру, заставлять мириться, и вообще к России претензий нет, а к Украине, как мы видим, их стало больше.
Sergei, the phrase wipe out Kiev is really amazing. It accurately reflects what is going on in Russia and what goals they are pursuing. Sergei, a question for you. Could Trump convince Putin not to launch a nutter strike on Kiev or to refuse to retaliate against Ukraine through Kiev? And in general, if there were no such words from Trump, how much could that motivate Putin? Because impunity, we understand very well where impunity leads. We remember, and you talk in detail on our airwaves about how things work in Russia's temporarily occupied territories. If you fantasize that Putin really decides to use the Oreshnik on Kiev or other Ukrainian targets, what is the likelihood that it will actually take off and reach its target? No matter how much Trump talks and no matter how many times he speaks in front of every TV camera in the world, on the one hand, at the very beginning he gave us hope that this war could end, not on the battlefield, but at the negotiating table. And Trump gave us that hope, but then he took it away. He showed, although he himself did not fully believe and did not realize, that Russia is not going to end this war and is not going to put an end to it at the negotiating table. Russia has planned and will continue to kill Ukrainians. America in this situation found itself in the unfamiliar role of the mouse that barked at the elephant. Because the elephant at some point just turned his head, touched his trunk and said, "It feels like Trump, he's saying something there." But it didn't interfere with the elephant's movement or affect what was going on. Trump called Putin, talked to him, suggested something. But the real object of concern and retribution for Trump was Ukraine. There is no way that Ukraine would accept a Nobel Peace Prize to sacrifice itself and stand on Trump's pedestal, gilded and unnaturally majestic. Ukraine's task was long ago to say, yes, of course, do what you want with me, because we are also for peace and, of course, for Trump all over the world.
Эта Украина никак не соглашается на Нобелевскую премию мира, принеся себя в жертву под пьедестал Трампа, золоченого в ненатуральную величину. Задача Украины была давным-давно сказать, да, конечно, делайте со мной что хотите, потому что мы тоже за мир и, конечно же, за Трампа во всем мире.
Ukraine is not like that. There are no complaints about Putin. And now, when Trump explains that Putin, of course, has his hands untied, and everyone began to think, including about Oreshnik, no one is sure. And it still exists. What flew before was what year of manufacture and what exactly, and whether it was modernized. It is clear that on the American element base, because America, as a partner of Russia, remains so. But the second time it seems, it didn't work. Russia had crucial, acute, and important moments. For example, the whole winter, when people were dying on the front, but the front line was not moving. That's when something massive could have been applied to bring about a turning point, especially since the Russian grouping is large, strong, and deployed. First shoot back into Ukraine, break the first edge, bomb the entire rear, and then throw the offensive. That's when it could have been done a year ago, 2 or 3 years ago. But nothing took off, didn't fly, didn't explode, and didn't change the situation at the front. Why? Because, well, okay, let them die. But either because every day of war is for the greater good, or because there is nothing to fight with. And now, why should there be? Where is that secret super-hyper weapon that only 2 people on the planet believed in, Hitler and Putin? They like to think that this super weapon was super powerful, unusual, and had amazing parameters, which would not only change the course of the war, but also the balance of power on the planet. But Russia did not have it and does not have it. The fact that under the guise of Oreshnik flew off once, well, something flew off, but the second time it should have been already, because the situation at the front pushed to the fact that there is a second Oreshnik, let's shoot, the third, fourth, fifth. All this is from the category of Europe's and the world's fears invented in a convenient Cold War configuration. Let the whole world be afraid of the Soviet Union, because it is scary, it has a nuclear cudgel, industrial potential, but in fact the Soviet Union cannot do without us. It does not have its own technologies, and the reproducibility of technologies in the Russians tends to 0, but no one talks about it. So we will continue to be afraid. So we will have a NATO bloc. We will have a growing military economy. There will be beneficiaries who will make good money from it. And at the same time, there will be American control over Europe and the whole world, which Trump now refuses because it is supposedly not profitable for him. In fact, just because he can't hear or see the rustling of dollars in his pocket doesn't mean it's unprofitable. Trump is primitive and thinks it's unprofitable. All of this has been a convenient and wonderful tool for a long time. Ouch, I'm afraid. I'm afraid those Russians are so scary. But Russians lost one war after another. The first, second, third, fourth. The Russians were beaten by everyone who wanted and could, and even by those who did not want and could not. The Soviet Union, which thought it was so, lost the Afghan war right in front of the whole world. The Afghan war was the rock on which the whole carcass of the Soviet Union stood unsteady and then rolled downhill. And since Russia has not revised its methods of warfare, Ukraine is still instructed to respond, but by no means to invent new options on its own. Europe, too, is instructed to fear the Soviet Union with its nuclear weapons. It is only now that they are coming out of the uncoupling, and America is working as a provocateur here, indulging the Soviet Union and Putin, saying that there is bound to be a nutter now, that there will definitely be a nuclear something. Look how wrong the Ukrainians were. Russia had a lot of moments in 3.5 years when it was necessary to present, show, and pound its fist on the table, but there was only one nutcracker, and then silence. Friends, what do you think? Right now, right under this video in the comments, will Putin launch a nutcracker on Kyiv or Ukraine? Leave your opinion, your emotions. What do you think about Trump and Putin's phone call? We are interested in your opinion, because we have a thinking audience. Don't forget to traditionally support Sergei Slonyan's analysis with a single like. Only this way it will be seen by as many people as possible, including in Russia. And Sergei, let's talk more about what has been happening recently on the territory of temporary Russia. Operation Spiderweb is a legendary, no exaggeration, SBU operation. Ukraine hit Russian military airfields with drones that flew out of vans. Already officially, the General Staff said that 41 strategic aircraft were destroyed, including A-50s, Tu-95s, Tu-22s, a unique operation. How, in your opinion, could this have happened? Where was the FSB at that moment? Who could have conveyed such information to Putin about such a failure? In general, I would like to hear your opinion and analyze how Putin personally reacted to this.
И в целом, тут вот хотелось бы услышать ваше мнение, вашу аналитику, как на это реагировал лично Путин.
Since it does not affect Putin personally, he is neither cold nor hot, neither scared nor in any way affected by it. Putin was scared when Prigozhin went to personally kill him. Everything else fits into the framework of Putin paying for his pleasures with his country, paying with people. What does it matter that before that he had an attempt on the Crimean Bridge, on the city, on the Kremlin, and now once again on the Crimean Bridge and on some strategic airfields? In a normal country, such a failure would lead the leader to admit fault and show responsibility. But in Russia, the leader is seen as infallible, the final truth. Losses mean some generals or officers might be replaced, but overall, Putin's position remains firm.
Он последняя истина. И то, что где-то там что-то произошло, ну да, некоторое количество генералов, какое-то количество прапорщиков, то есть какое-то количество где-то как-то будет подвержено жестокой версии ротации. С кем-то еще что-то будет. Но мы оцениваем позицию Путина.
He has colonels by the thousands, by the wagons. About 200, 300 people died in this war. What does Putin care? He has spare generals. Ukraine has already exterminated about 20 of them. Overall, Russia has lost millions of people. What difference does it make? There will be more. There will be others. According to the papers, Russia has 146 million. It had 147 million. What does it matter if a fraction of a percent disappears? And we see that Ukraine is actually ahead of Russia. Ukraine has so mastered the methods of war that it should not ask NATO to join, but NATO should ask Ukraine to join. When there are now ridiculous statements that NATO instructors are teaching Ukrainians how to fight, in fact, it is Ukraine that should teach NATO, because Ukrainians know how, and can. The Ukrainian army today is the most modern, advanced, and experienced, and from civilian life, it is also the most creative. The way it has mastered the latest techniques, weapons, and their use, no one else in the world operates like that. Even the fighters from Persia, they are inferior because the enemy is different, and Hamas does not have such counterintelligence. It is not a state structure. But here, in a year and a half, to carry out such a special operation in complete silence, without a single leak, under the noses of counterintelligence, the FSB, and all of Russia's security forces, this is unique.
У Хамаса нет такой контрразведки, и это не государственная структура. А здесь за 1,5 года провести такую спецоперацию в полнейшей тишине, без единой утечки, под носом у контрразведки, у ФСБ, у всех силовиков России.
For us, this is indicative, and we have a lot of questions about it, including, is Putin scared? But this day is no different for him. Several bridges were blown up. Several airfields were blown up. Something on the Crimean Bridge once again. Before that, there were blown up cities, people, other targets. Putin has such statistics in his red folder. Tanks -5, people -1,000, generals -1. Although people and generals are not the same thing, strategic bombers -40. So, Putin has plenty of all that. Starting this war, of course, he relished the idea of a quick victory, Napoleon-esque beauty, on a white horse taking the parade himself. But when it didn't work out, Putin didn't choke or marvel. He's not like Stalin, who would retreat to his dacha in shock. Putin's situation is different. If it didn't work in 3 days, he just keeps going, enjoying it, especially with Shoigu still young and June and October ahead. Back then, the team was the old one. For Putin, this war is a daily intoxication, but it comes at a cost. People, lives, equipment. Nothing has changed for him. For you, me, NATO, and America, much has changed. But for Putin, nothing at all.
Ничего не изменилось. Для нас с вами изменилось многое. Для НАТО очень многое. Для Америки невероятно много.
Sergei, to what extent does this generally roll back Russia's military evolution by decades? Because we understand perfectly well that Russia did not create strategic aviation.
Десятилетия назад, потому что мы прекрасно понимаем, что стратегическую авиацию Россия не создавала.
And the two A-50s that died as a result of Ukraine's brilliant special operation are irreplaceable, because Russia is simply not capable of manufacturing such AWACS. Everything that flew and controlled the airspace of not only Ukraine, but also the continent, was built on Western electronics. America, of course, is ready to fulfill this tender and provide a huge amount of new equipment, but this does not mean that Russia will be able to quickly develop and reproduce something. So -2 modern airplanes is a serious and irreparable loss. Similarly, as Ukraine is very targeted and painful in hitting oil refining, which in Russia is based on foreign technology and equipment, and when a refinery is hit, the fire can be put out, but it is difficult to repair. Refineries in Russia are already frequently out of service because there is no possibility to carry out routine maintenance. Equipment imports are delayed. The loss of two A-50s is an irreparable loss, and long-range aircraft, all these Tu-95s, Tu-22s and others, are equipment built back in the 60s.
Это невосполнимо. Самолеты дальней авиации, все эти Ту, все вот эти вот Ту-22 и прочее, оно постройки 60-х годов.
Trying to imagine that the letter M in the designation means modern production is an illusion. There is no such thing as modern production. It is all inherited from the ancestors. Like the Egyptians, modern Egyptians can pretend that they are the builders of the pyramids, but they cannot build them. They go around the world and ask, "Can you tell us how the pyramids were built a few centuries ago?" We are the great heirs of culture. We supposedly invented civilization, but we have forgotten exactly how. Modern Russia in the defense sector is like them. It asks how submarines and rocket engines were made and cannot replicate their production. Where to buy a couple of AWACS? Where are the Tu-22s? Maybe there are some in Vietnam. In Russia, production of Tu-160, a modern airplane, is conducted with very big reservations. The project was adopted by the Politburo in 1967. Drawings began in the 70th, 10 years of drawing. The first flight took place in 1980. This is a very modern airplane by the standards of 1980, and now the domestic industry produces about 1 unit a year.
Его в 70-м году начали чертить. Его 10 лет рисовали. В 80-м году Ту-160 совершил первый полет. Современнейший самолет. 1980 года. Еще немножечко юбилейчик тут отметим. Так вот, их производят отечественная промышленность по одной штуке в год.
After that, the airplane is not sent to the front, but goes for flight tests because, oh Lord, help me, what if it takes off? If it takes off, oh Lord, help me to make it land. Test pilots, they landed. Thank God, that's it. All heroes of Russia posthumously. Excuse me, let's do the next one. And it's not clear how it was done. It's a traditional weapon. What's worse is that Russia is ready for something like this. No airplanes, pilots are not sorry when they run out of spoons. The Russian army has already given up port bans in our time, when you and I lived and were sensible people, and Russia was still washing port bans. In the Russian army, everything was always on shoelaces. Boot on shoelace, cap on shoelace, overcoat on shoelace. Shoelaces were abandoned, but now they're coming back. By the Second World War, for which the Soviet Union was preparing, with all the arms competitions won and a huge number of automatic weapons, in 1941 all the preparation ended with a return to the Mosin rifle of the 19th century, the Nagana pistol of the 19th century, and the Maxim machine gun of the 19th century, and with this continued to fight for peace in the middle of the 20th century. The present-day Soviet Union in this respect will similarly switch to the Mosin rifle, the Maxim machine gun, and the Nagant pistol. There are no more AWACS. We have run out of nuclear strategic bombers, so we will harness this nuclear bomb now and drive slowly. and in 6 months we will get there, and if anything, we will bayonet and set fire to this nuclear bomb with a Bigfoot cord. Russia always has such an inexhaustible human resource and such incredible patience and obedience that the lack of victories, lack of armaments, lack of the latest technologies does not change anything. So what? So the war goes on. It's like in the 41st. So what if there are no automatic rifles, no submachine guns, no machine guns? That's all for later, someday, on Lend-Lease, somewhere in the rear. And now we're bayoneting, if anything, and with sapper spades. Because it's not an anecdote, it's unfortunately true. When there was one rifle for 3, when people were gathered, forced, compelled, chased, and there were no weapons for them, and when everyone was waiting for his best friend to be killed, he would take his rifle to make one shot and be killed, and then the next one, the same friend with whom you shared the stew, would take this rifle from your cold hands. Nothing changes, and if Putin said that to fight, it means to fight. Well, father? Well, if anything happens, you tell us. But for all that, the whole world is in favor of Russia. Russia pays well, so China, America, Europe, Iran, North Korea, that's where the Shaiga flew for the 4th time recently. They are all ready to help, especially since Russia pays, and pays. And so, if Russia has run out of airplanes from the 60s, which in general were the basis for the famous nuclear triad, it means that we will carry them in our hands and blow them up anyway. But it ended with armament, which they have learned to make, and progress suggests that modern warfare is a war of drones. Let's have drones. And the whole world gives drones. And Russia not only produces them, it also buys them. Therefore, Russia is saturated with drones. Drones of different systems, classes, payloads, and different targeting is much more than the back of the head of itching engineers who say, but we do not remember how Tu-160 assembled the previous. We would have someone to tell us. And while some are thinking and remembering how and from what the T-34 tank is made, China, Iran, North Korea, and America are helping Russia switch to new types of weapons and new tactics of their use. Drones, for example. Russia, of course, is not a quick learner, but it is used to living badly.